My name is Hadley Bajramovic. I'm a senior immigration attorney, and Zayra is a senior immigration assistant, paralegal, interpreter, you name it, and has worked with me now 15 years. And, the main thing that's trending right now in our community and that people want to talk about is how can we not be deported?
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about, Zayra, the consul mobile that I went to yesterday. But first, we want to talk about government checks and balances that are normally in place that allow attorneys to fight and get, we call it bite at the apple, to have the opportunity to make a case
Your
for a
chance.
client that they should stay. And, if they lose, we can't guarantee that we're going to win, but we can fight and try. And, at the end of the day, if the judge doesn't agree or an officer, then we go either to the next stage or maybe there are no other next stages. But we don't even know what we can depend on right now because yesterday that flight, they were supposedly taking gang members out of the country to El Salvador. A federal judge blocked the plane from leaving, maybe an injunction.
Mm-hmm,
I haven't followed the procedural history. So the plane was not supposed to leave the U.S. and take these individuals out. And it did.
There were like
Zayra,
more
you
than
were telling me.
100. Yeah, there were more than 200 people deported to El Salvador. Supposedly, there were really high list criminals. I saw the video that Bukele posted, and it was not nice to see.
What?
We're like treating, criminals. This is how we treat criminals, pretty much. That was the video about, how they took
Okay.
them out of, there was like lines of military men, and then they were like taking them down the plane, like really like handcuffed and like chained, and then two people holding each person. And then they took them to Secot like right away. And it was these lines of police cars, and it was like a really like organized process that they did. And then once they're in Secot, they actually like shaved their hair, put them in the white, uniform that everybody has. So it was just, something that but like, many people are saying is that, ICE unfortunately are targeting anybody now with like what they believe is a gang tattoo from the Tren de Aragua. So it's just like, we don't know if those are actually members of the Tren de Aragua. They're just like going by whatever I think it is. So, there's mothers in Venezuela who were like, please, my son is not a criminal. He's not a gang member. Please, Bukele, release my son kind of situation. So it's just like
Excuse me.
it's a really hard, topic,
And then at this past week, there was also Dr. Rasha Alawiya, who was a Lebanese professor at Brown. I don't know the procedural history again, but apparently there was a stay of removal or an injunction against her deportation, which was ignored. And I think that was ignored in an airport, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that ties into this enforcement that we're seeing at airports. You mentioned somebody traveling from Puerto Rico to, I don't remember, Washington.
It was like Wyoming or Wisconsin, like that. And, if this spouse of a U.S. citizen overstayed her visa tourism Peru, and he voted for Trump because he believed that Trump was going to be only focusing on deporting criminals, like the bad people. But obviously, that's not the case.
No. I mean, that was the camp. We're going to get rid of the rapists and the murderers and the gang members and all of us who work in immigration. No, the numbers don't add up to what the media has put out there, for people to believe it's okay to deport in mass. Those who work in immigration have many signs. I was explaining this to somebody that For example, we can go to a detention facility and they separate people by danger. There's blue, orange, and red. They're very few in red. And red indicates, like if they've, had like a felony or higher.
Yeah.
Orange, maybe they've had a DUI, and blue, no criminality. The most people up in the detention facilities are in blue. I mean, those are just the little like empirical, proof that we have when we're not sure what the Pew Institute numbers or USCIS numbers or ICE numbers. We know they're inflated. We can tell by court, by screenings that we do. I very rarely, if not ever, had a screening for a murderer who's being deported.
Like you were mentioning, Hadley, the cases that they're posting on ICE page, focusing on we detained these rapists or something like that. It was like a 19-year-old kid.
Oh, yeah. That was a Guatemalan 19-year-old that they said, had sex with a minor. It was alleged. The problem with these laws, and it's the same here in California, usually it's a parent who called the police because the daughter was going out with an older guy. These are things that are illegal here, but culturally normal in the home country. It's a gray area.
Yeah.
It's not always what it looks like. ICE is deporting U.S. citizens, and people are asking me, how does that happen? Well, that's easy. That happens all the time. We see that ICE will go and do something like a shock and awe and taking everybody in that shock and awe moment where people are confused. Hey, what's going on? And maybe they don't not carrying their passport. They're not carrying their birth certificate. They might be saying, hey, I'm a citizen, but ICE is rounding up 10 people, so they're not listening to them. I know that happens.
Yeah, and also they're like racial profiling, obviously. They're like, oh, you're colored, so most likely you don't have a status here like everybody else. So many people have said there's, thousands of Europeans here without status, but they never get questioned. This lady was making a video of like, I've never been questioned, and I was here, without status for, 15 years. But because the way I look, I was never, ever questioned. And he's like, this is not about, people being here without status. It's focusing on, colored people, the hardworking people that are here in the States, that do the hardest jobs. And like Hadley said, they're not criminals and rarely have felonies. My 15 years of experience doing this, like Hadley said, we rarely get somebody who, I don't know, had murders.
The majority of the cases are DUIs. Domestic violence, not at all. I'm not condoning domestic violence. That really is the highest level of crime we see on a regular basis. Regular basis means a few times a year. DUI, probably a little bit more.
Yeah, mainly here and there we do domestic violence, like Hadley said. Like cases come from a machismo culture, so they think it's okay to push the wife or things like that. It's not, and they should not never do that. But because they come from a place that they're like it's seen as normal, depending on the small village or town they live. I come from a small town that many times it's just like, oh, it's okay. She got me upset, which is never okay. But they learn it the hard way here, knowing they're going to go to jail, going to felony, and many times they get removed. And so.
Yeah. And that would be a fair process where somebody was tried by a jury of their peers, went to jail, released, and had a proper hearing in front of an immigration judge. And then that person is ordered removed because they're not eligible for any type of relief. That person went through a due process. And we're not arguing that that is wrong. We stand on that side of the law, that we are here to enforce the laws, to advise our clients how to abide by the law, what our laws are, because some of them are different than their home countries. And activists have the right intentions, but sometimes they're not telling the whole story. We try to review things to give the correct story. So far, we can't tell if the right things are being done because they're being done outside of due process. That's what we're talking about today. And then we get to people coming to us and asking, because of this, what can we do to protect ourselves? Yesterday, I was at a consul mobile where the consulate of Guatemala goes out into different areas to help people get their government IDs. And it was one of the highest attendances I've ever seen. I mean, people are getting their consular IDs and birth certificates and making plans. I talked to a lot of people that said that they're leaving, and that's one thing that is understandable. People don't want an attorney. They want to save their money. They don't, want to spend, when an average, the attorney fees are $5,000. Okay. So it makes sense they want to keep their $5,000 if they're going home.
Yeah, go back home.
Yeah. Just because people left doesn't mean they can come back legally. Deportation is like going to prison. Why would we get so upset about somebody being deported if it's synonymous or like going to prison for a crime and being separated from their family for 3 to 5 years? I was kind of in shock that was an analogy. But the difference is the person's not going to prison to serve a sentence. They're leaving forever. There are some limited exceptions, but for the most part, these people are leaving with no legal way to return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's because of permanent bars, removal orders, and legal issues. If they were to return illegally, they would compound their legal problem. It's not like being sentenced to a misdemeanor separation from the family by serving 6 months, in the local jail. This is leaving your home and family. I mean, when I heard people talking about what they were going to do to prepare to leave, oh my God, just listing everything. I have to sell my home, my cars, talk to creditors. I owe money to these credit cards. All of the stuff to go through to leave is heartbreaking. They've acquired and built up over 20 years. That's what people were talking about yesterday at Consul Mobile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we spoke to one of them and say I paid off my home already, but then, I have my own business, but this has become really hard. I'm assuming that, you have all the anti-immigrant people telling, probably not hire you anymore because, oh yeah, I don't want you here kind of thing. So that's what I didn't know exactly what kind of business he had, but he was just saying that since Trump took office, his business has been harder to keep up. That's what I got and grasped from what he was saying. And he was like, I was telling my wife that we should just go, sell everything and go back home. They have small children, and the spouse is not very happy about taking that route. But, he was just explaining how difficult it has become to just survive here. Like Hadley said, it's heartbreaking for them to be pushed to make this really hard decision of leaving this country that they've known as their own for so many years, and having U.S. citizen children, and what am I gonna do when I go back home after these many years and things like that. So, and it's
Yeah, the children are being picked on. I heard 3 times over the weekend about bullying, telling children things like, your mom and dad are about to be deported. Not only in schools, but on college campuses.
Mhm. Right.
So just giving up everything you worked for. These are people who have no criminal background too. I mean, the guy that we were talking to yesterday, no criminal background, served a role in society. So does his wife. And just because he's not wanted anymore, having to take all the steps to let go, move to a place where his children have never been. I think it's tragic.
It is.
It's happening all over the place. And what people are asking us is, how can we stop it? How can we protect ourselves so I know whether to make the decision to go home or not? And what we're doing with the Consulate of Guatemala is looking at these cases. His was very complicated, and we're going to have to do background checks, and we're going to have to request his file from court and figure out if there is anything we can do to reopen that hearing and maybe get him back into court in front of an immigration judge. That would be the solution. And there are a lot of people out there that can do that. And we're finding that courts are being kinder on sua sponte issues. That means like where there's no law that says they have to reopen. The judge considers all the factors and can make their own decision. We're seeing a kinder review of things than before, because I think the judges are recognizing that people may have not been properly advised in the past, or, victims of fraud, that led to like removal orders or in absentia removal orders. Things are difficult to fight. That's what we can do. And that's why we're going to be at the Consulate of Guatemala for the rest of the year, meeting with Guatemalan constituents and going through their cases and doing what we call due diligence, where cases are complicated. A lot of things are easy, and we can tell based on simple facts. Other cases require a lot of due diligence, ordering and requesting files from former attorneys. That's what we're going to be doing.
The case of the gentleman who has 2 sons in the Marines, not just one.
Yeah.
But then unfortunately has extensive cut and released and voluntary departures and whatnot. And so we have to do a background checking out for really understand what his options are. And then his partner doesn't have any like, immigration background of that sort. And then she's so afraid to like get removed that she doesn't want to do anything, kind of thing. So laying low, so, and that's many cases that we have, that people are so afraid of everything that is going on that they're just like, I'm just not going to say anything. I'm going to keep quiet and pretend I'm not here. This lady has a way to get a green card because of her to serving in the military. It's something that sad to hear that they're afraid of doing or saying anything because of the consequences that can cause, I'm without status.
Yeah, and I guess that's why Trump gave people this option of the CBP home, where you can fill out your information, take a selfie, and say, I'm deporting today. Telling people, if you do this, you can come back legally. But that is misleading, because if somebody fills that out and they have a permanent bar, they might come back in 10 years. Or if they have a false claim to citizenship, they're never coming back. It's misleading.
And it's coming from so many places, Hadley, because I had a brief talk with this lady from Colombia, and she's, she has a partner who's a U.S. citizen. She entered through CBP1, and she called USCIS, and they told her, like, yeah, your court should be closed and you should be able to adjust. And I was explaining, you have to go to court, you have to keep going, you have to do whatever the judge says. It's not like you can say, oh, I have a U.S. citizen spouse, I'm not coming here anymore because USCIS told me that I should do it through them.
I mean, we should address this, because the USCIS is not allowed to give you legal advice.
That's what
and
I told
they're
her.
careful not to do it. You can say, I'm married to a U.S. citizen, and they can give you the Form I-130, and that's about the limit of what they can do. Some try to overhelp and cause damage. I had a similar thing a week or 2 ago where USCIS told somebody they could adjust him. They're not taking a professional intake when they give advice. They're not looking at all the facts.
So
they're hearing somebody.
So I was telling her situation is, and then she was just telling me, no, but I call USCIS, and they told me that because if I marry a U.S. citizen, my court, I shouldn't attend court anymore, or I shouldn't proceed with court. It was just like,
okay, well, that's just incredible, because that USCIS officer was leading somebody into an in absentia
Yeah.
removal order, which is incredibly difficult to overcome.
Mhm. So it was just like
You've been removed in your absence. You didn't show up, so we're ordering you removed.
mhm.
A lot of people try to reopen them 20 years later, and the judge is like, why are you doing this now? You've had 20 years. Why didn't you show up? You were told to show up. You didn't show up, and then you had to prove that you didn't know for something that happened 20 years ago.
Mhm.
That maybe the USCIS is giving legal advice now as part of this plan. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a conspiratorist.
She was telling me this is what they told me, and they believe like USAS, immigration, so they know what they're
Yeah.
talking. They're the ones who told me this, and I was like,
Yeah, people will believe, but like notarios, the USCIS, who are the other people that they believe over an immigration attorney? It's incredible. Their cousin,
yeah,
who
20 attorneys in their family.
I heard today an immigration attorney gave the wrong advice to somebody. Somebody who's very well known told somebody they could adjust status if they had a legal entry and a petition from a green card holding parent. And I'm still trying to figure out how that works, but it's totally wrong. Yeah, Zayra's like,
He was talking about 5 years ago
I think he's talking,
because
but
we
as long
were
as somebody
able
needs status,
to.
they could have done it.
We were able to adjust people during the pandemic.
Maybe it was 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and the person was still in status or
Yes.
something,
It was current.
know.
And so we were able to do a few adjustments. They arrived with a tourist visa in status, and their LPR spouse petitioned them.
It must be that. I didn't think about asking him when he was told
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, things change
Yeah, now
every
it's
day.
like 2-3 years back.
So yeah, that's another point. People should, if they haven't had a consultation, I mean, I would say this year because things have changed so much. Like we're going to go out and brief the consulate on April 22nd on all the changes. Everything will be different. But it's best if people have a relationship with an immigration attorney, and that way the immigration attorney has a duty to inform people of changes that will affect them.
Yeah, and experienced
Yeah.
attorney. Because like Hadley said, we have heard all these weeks how many attorneys have, you know, advised wrongly to the people that come for consultations. And like you have to be a very experienced attorney to pick up on those things and say, no, back then this might have been could have done
Yeah.
that, but now you can't.
Right.
A lot of people call us 5 years later, 3 years later, and we're like, well, back then, yes, but now you're not eligible anymore. We can't advise you to do it because it's too risky. So it's a constant change, like Hadley was stating. And
Yeah.
we have
We
to
can't
just
issue
keep up.
spot for the
Mhm.
future. One of the cases that went today to court, for an adjustment interview, they're really worried about being denied because they're referring people to court. The officer said in the interview, this is not one of those bad calls that I have to make. The officer was telling us that now she has to call ICE into her interviews, and she hasn't been doing that for a while. It happened to me once, and it was the worst day of my life. I will
Mhm.
never forget it.
Mhm.
My whole career moving forward was with an aim not to ever let that happen again. That particular client now is a US citizen and has a family. We keep in touch. But having ICE show up in an adjustment of status interview is the worst.
Mhm. And one time, Hadley, you were saying it was obvious that officer was just hanging around until the ICE officers showed up.
It was that
Okay.
that one.
I remember we had another one, but it was not quite the same. And also it was a gentleman. But I remember you explain, telling us how it was obvious the officer was pretending.
Yeah, ICE showed up, and ICE and DHS shared a building,
Mm-hmm.
and he called and detained my client. I waited and ICE released him because we hadn't detected any problem and neither did ICE. Like the USCIS officer called ICE in on an interview where the person was not deportable
Mm-hmm.
and he got out immediately. So it was fine, but the problem is that we don't know certain ambiguities in the law about people filing for adjustment. And we just make sure that from our experience, our knowledge, and that's what makes you an expert. We have a sign in our break room that says the skilled sailor was never made by calm seas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a reminder we've developed this experience over time. We're at 8,000 cases. We have a very high success rate. We know we can't please everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but for experience, that's why people come to us. We have more people seeking second opinions now than ever before, willing to do that.
In one case,
Go ahead.
we recently got an approval. What's one of our clients who, came to us and she was like, yes, I want to hire you to do this process. And then she opted to look out for more attorneys. And I guess her belief is that she needed to find somebody who had a 5.0 star review, which is,
Uh-huh.
you can't have that. I mean, well,
Yeah.
that attorney, she screwed up her case and submitted the process 3 times, getting denied. So finally, she came back to us and say, I'm sorry, for whatever reason, I went with this attorney who had a 5.0 review and instead of you guys. And then she came back to us. We helped her and she was just recently approved. And, and she's so happy, but it took longer for her to be able to have a status because she decided to go with the 5.0 star review lady who didn't know what she was doing.
Doesn't that make it hard, though, to tell people what to look for in an attorney? I had somebody who hired an attorney over me because she was from Harvard. I went to the University of Memphis, an excellent law school. She hired the Harvard attorney. Her case was denied. And she came to me crying. She was like, I'm sorry I didn't hire you, but this girl was from Harvard. So we refiled. She's approved, naturalized. She's like the top of her field in her particular field. And it's so amazing to see her career going where it went. And now she's at Harvard. I think that's an amazing story.
And
But I just think that you can talk to the attorney, ask a lot of questions. You're going to be able to tell if the attorney knows what they're talking about. I mean, some attorneys have confidence, but the law is complicated and they should talk like they're talking about something complicated and not something easy.
And also, Hadley, one thing to mention, which was one of one of the people that we spoke yesterday in the consulate of Guatemala and the mobile consulate of Guatemala, was that they're getting advice from their legal assistant and not really talking to the attorney.
True.
So that's important because you always have to go with the attorney, mainly work with the legal assistant, but she's not supposed to be advising you assistant. And he's like, oh no, it was the assistant. We're like, oh, well, that makes sense because whatever he was telling us didn't make sense.
Yeah,
And it was,
that's correct.
yeah.
The legal assistant should be trained to know what they can and cannot advise on. And that's one of the good things about our staff is that they've been with the firm for a long time and they know and support one another. If they see each other stepping out their bounds, they pull back and ask me if, they can make a 5-10 minute call for me just to explain what they know. And that way the client knows they were advised by the attorney.
Exactly.
A lot of times they don't know. Senior assistants sometimes don't spot an issue, but it's the attorney responsible for the information, guidance, or legal advice given to the client, not the legal assistant. We've gone past our time, but this is a good discussion. I hope people learn from it. This is what we talk about here all day. We do a lot of consultations. This is what we try to talk about as a firm. We know how to prevent these things from happening when we discover them
I know that
in other cases.
yeah, we've discussed this on previous posts, but please do not go to notarios to file these petitions for you.
Yeah.
Like, or legal assistants or ex USCIS officers or whatever they call themselves. Like, please, because we know there's a trend now that people are going back for whatever reason.
Worst time.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
cheaper. Many times that's not even true. Please do not go to your tax preparer or real estate person, whatever jobs or titles she has. Please do not trust them because they're practicing law illegally and they don't know more than go with a trusted, experienced attorney. And I cannot tell you how many times in 15 years I've heard so many stories about that person that helped everybody in your family, or maybe one person that got it right and they, you know, spread the word and everybody, thinks that she's good and she can do it. But you know about that one case, you don't know about the 100 ones that she has not done.
Right.
So, like we say in Spanish, the tip is more expensive. Many
Mm-hmm.
times, we have people that go with another attorneys and they spend all this money and they come back to us. So at the end of the day, they spend way more money than they supposed to from the start, but because they think the 5-star review attorney or this other attorney that my family member told me was good. Like the one kid that after getting an approval from his SIGIS case, he decided to just pay somebody to not do anything.
Yeah.
When you don't have the right advice or the right people like that you hang out with or like the right support, unfortunately, those are the bad decisions.
USCIS has a campaign that says the wrong help can hurt. I mean, they have all kinds of materials about this because it's a major problem.
Yes.
So the wrong help can hurt. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It will continue to come back now that Zayra has internet.
Thank you.
Talk about the issues we're dealing with every week.